yesterday was a day that will forever be etched in my memory. It started out like any normal day, nothing out of the ordinary, but it ended with me on the edge of insanity. It all began when I got a message from a friend, a photo that changed everything. The image was simple, but it hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. My wife, Emma, was in my car. That wouldn't have been strange under normal circumstances. She drives my car sometimes. But it was the man sitting next to her that threw my world into a tailspin. He wasn't just a passenger, his body language, the casual ease with which he sat there, suggested something more. They were in a close conversation, their heads leaned toward each other as if sharing a secret, or worse, an intimate moment. I froze, staring at the screen, hoping for some kind of explanation that would magically make everything right. My mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was he a friend? A colleague? But why in my car, and why did she never mention him? My pulse quickened, and an uncontrollable anger began to rise inside me. The rational part of me tried to take over, tried to calm the storm. But it was no use. The image felt like a betrayal, a knife twisting deep in my gut. How long had this been going on? Who was this guy? The questions flooded my mind like a torrent, and there were no answers. At least, not yet. I stared at the photo again, scrutinizing every detail, the way her lips were slightly parted, her expression calm, not like someone sneaking around but more like someone who was perfectly at ease. The man was younger than me, his hair dark and trimmed neatly. He had that look of someone who had it all together, the type who could walk into any room and own it. Who was he? How did he fit into my life? More importantly, how did he fit into Emma's life? Anger pulsed through my veins. It was the kind of anger that made my hands shake. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but I did none of that. Instead, I stood there, staring at the photo until my vision blurred. I knew I couldn't act on this impulsively. Confronting her without the whole story might backfire, might leave me looking like the paranoid fool. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it in my bones, something was wrong. I paced the room, my thoughts spiraling out of control. Was this the first time? Had there been others? I thought back to all the late nights, the unexplained absences, and the vague answers to simple questions. Was I just being blind? How could I not have noticed something sooner? But then again, maybe there was nothing to notice. Maybe this was just some harmless situation that I was blowing out of proportion. But that feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Emma was the love of my life. We had been through so much together. I had always trusted her implicitly, never doubted her loyalty or her love for me. We had built a life, a future together. And now, one simple photo was threatening to tear all of that apart. My phone buzzed again. It was my friend, the same one who had sent the photo. "Did you see this?" the message read. I wanted to respond, to ask a million questions, but I didn't. I didn't want to involve anyone else in this, at least not yet. This was between me and Emma, and I needed to confront her on my own terms, in my own way. I couldn't stop staring at that damn photo, the way she looked so comfortable. That hurt more than anything. I felt like a stranger peering into someone else's life, someone else's relationship. That car, my car, suddenly felt like foreign territory, a place where secrets had been shared that I wasn't a part of. The thought made me sick. But what could I do? Was I supposed to wait until she got home and act like everything was fine? Pretend I didn't know what I had seen? Could I even look her in the eyes without giving away the turmoil churning inside me? I sat down on the couch, my hands still trembling. This was surreal, like one of those bad dreams where you know something awful is about to happen, but you can't stop it. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the sweat starting to form on my forehead. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me, trapping me in this suffocating moment of doubt and confusion. I had to get out. I needed air. Grabbing my keys, I walked out the door, not caring where I was headed. The crisp evening air hit me like a slap to the face, but it didn't clear my head. All I could think about was that photo, and what it might mean for my marriage. As I drove aimlessly, the silence in the car was deafening. This car, our car, suddenly felt tainted, like it was no longer just mine or ours, but something shared with that stranger. I didn't know how long I drove, but by the time I finally pulled over, my mind had settled into a cold, hard focus. I had to confront Emma. There was no other way around it. I couldn't sit with this knot in my chest for another second. But how would I do it? How would I even start the conversation? The image of her sitting there, smiling with him, played on repeat in my mind. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. What if she had been lying to me all along? What if our entire life together had been a lie? The idea made me sick to my stomach. But there was one thing I knew for sure: when Emma came home tonight, I would get the answers I deserved. Emma arrived home later than usual. I had been sitting in the living room, trying to calm myself down, rehearsing what I would say when she walked through the door. But when she stepped inside, the confrontation I had been planning immediately had to be pushed aside. She looked pale, her face drawn, like someone who had been through the ringer. She barely glanced at me before letting out a weary sigh. "I feel awful," she said, rubbing her temples. "I've got the worst headache. I think I need to lie down." It was a perfect excuse, and I found myself paralyzed for a moment. The words I had been building up in my head, the accusations, the questions, died on my lips. How could I confront her now? She looked fragile, unwell, as if she had barely made it through the door. I watched her for a long second, trying to gauge if this was genuine or just an attempt to dodge what she must have sensed was coming. "I'm just going to head to bed early, okay?" she added, her voice barely above a whisper, as she started walking toward the stairs. She didn't even wait for me to respond. I stood there, frozen, the photo from earlier burning a hole in my mind. I wanted to demand answers right then and there. I wanted to confront her, ask her about the man in my car, about where she had been. But looking at her retreating figure, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear of the truth. Either way, I nodded stiffly as she disappeared into the bedroom. I could hear the door click softly as it closed behind her. For a few minutes, I sat on the couch, trying to figure out my next move. I was frustrated, torn between concern for her health and the gnawing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. Her sudden headache, her decision to go straight to bed without so much as a word about her day, it all felt too convenient, too scripted. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stand up. My eyes drifted to her purse, sitting on the table where she had dropped it. A sudden thought hit me: her phone. If I couldn't get answers from her directly, maybe her phone would provide them. Maybe it would tell me where she had really been tonight. Without hesitation, I grabbed the purse and pulled out her phone. The familiar feeling of guilt crept in, but I pushed it aside. I needed answers. I needed the truth. But when I pressed the home button, I was met with a lock screen and a password prompt. That wasn't unusual. Emma always had a password on her phone, as did I. But when I entered the code I knew, the same one she had always used, it didn't unlock. My heart sank. She had changed the password. I tried again, slower this time, making sure I wasn't hitting the wrong numbers, but the phone remained locked. A wave of dread washed over me. Why had she changed her password? Why now, of all times? The implications were clear, and they made me sick to my stomach. I put the phone down, staring at it for a moment as if it might magically open on its own. There was no point in trying to guess the new password. I knew Emma well enough to know that she wouldn't have chosen something easy to figure out. She was careful, methodical, and right now, that carefulness felt like a betrayal. If I couldn't get into her phone, I had to find another way. My thoughts raced back to the photo of her and the stranger. They had been in my car, sitting together like they were completely comfortable with each other. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in the car that could give me more answers. A receipt, a piece of paper, something they had left behind. I grabbed my keys and headed outside into the cool night air. the silence of the neighborhood felt oppressive, as if the world was holding its breath. When I reached the car, I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering over the door handle. This felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. I shouldn't have to be out here, rummaging through my own car for evidence of my wife's betrayal. But here I was. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The interior was dark and still, but it felt different now. What had once been a space shared between Emma and me now felt tainted, like it had been claimed by someone else, someone who had no right to be there. I turned on the overhead light and started searching. The passenger seat, where the stranger had sat, was the first place I checked. I ran my hand over the leather, hoping to find something, anything, that might give me a clue. At first, there was nothing. The car was spotless, like always. Emma was meticulous about keeping things clean, especially my car. But then, I found something. Wedged between the seat and the center console was a small piece of paper. My fingers fumbled as I pulled it free, my heart racing with anticipation. I unfolded it slowly, the tension building with each second. It was a parking receipt. The timestamp showed that it had been issued earlier that evening, only a couple of hours ago. But what caught my attention was the location. It wasn't from anywhere near where Emma said she had been. It was from a hotel downtown. My breath caught in my throat. The pieces were starting to come together, and they painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. I stared at the receipt for a long time, the weight of its significance pressing down on me. Emma had been at a hotel. With him. The thought made my skin crawl. I leaned back in the seat, my mind spinning. I had come out here hoping to find something, but now that I wasn't sure I could handle what it meant. My wife, the woman I had shared my life with, had lied to me. And this receipt was proof of it. I clenched my fists, anger and pain bubbling up inside me. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to face the reality of what was happening. But I knew one thing for certain, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The truth, no matter how painful, was out there now. And I had to confront it. The next morning, I was up early. I didn't sleep much, how could I? My mind had been racing all night, replaying everything over and over again. The photo of Emma with that man, the receipt from the hotel, the changed password on her phone, it all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. But I couldn't avoid it anymore. I had to confront her. I needed answers. I sat at the kitchen table, the parking receipt in front of me, waiting for Emma to wake up. The air felt thick with tension, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on me. The house was quiet, but inside my head, everything was chaos. Eventually, I heard her stir upstairs, the sound of soft footsteps padding down the hallway. My heart rate quickened. This was it. I had no idea how she would react, what excuses or explanations she might give, but I was determined to get to the truth. I couldn't live with this doubt any longer. Emma appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She smiled weakly at me, looking tired but unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Morning," she mumbled as she walked toward the kitchen, probably to get her first cup of coffee. But I wasn't going to let her slide into her normal routine, not today. Not after what I had found. "Emma," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. She paused, turning to look at me. I could see the confusion in her eyes, but there was also something else, something guarded, as if she knew on some level that this wasn't going to be a normal morning conversation. She walked over to the table slowly, eyeing me carefully. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious, sensing that something was wrong. I didn't waste any time. I picked up the receipt from the table and held it up for her to see. "Who were you there with, Emma?" I asked, my voice low but firm. Her face changed instantly. For a second, I saw panic flash in her eyes before she quickly masked it with confusion. She glanced at the receipt in my hand, then back at me. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to sound innocent, but I wasn't buying it. "Not anymore." I stood up, stepping closer, the tension between us growing. "This," I said, shaking the receipt slightly, "is from a hotel downtown. I found it in the car. You said you weren't feeling well last night, but you weren't anywhere near where you said you'd be. So, tell me, Emma, who were you with?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Her eyes darted to the side, as if she was searching for an explanation, something to make this all go away. But there was nothing she could say that would erase the fact that I had caught her. She knew it, and I knew it. She began, but then stopped herself. She swallowed hard, her hands twisting together nervously. "Jack, it's not what you think." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Not what I think? Really? Because what I think is that you've been lying to me. I think you've been meeting someone else. And this receipt, Emma, this proves it." Her face paled. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The silence between us was deafening, and with every passing second, my heart sank further. I wanted her to deny it, to say something that would make this all a terrible misunderstanding. But the truth was written all over her face. She couldn't deny it. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. I was tired, so tired of this feeling, of being in the dark, of wondering if everything we had built together was crumbling before my eyes. Emma took a step back, her arms crossing over her chest defensively. It's not serious," she said softly, but the words only made my anger flare. "Not serious?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been meeting him at a hotel. How long has this been going on, Emma? How long have you been lying to me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw real regret there. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. Not now. "Jack, please," she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't." I shook my head, unable to listen to her excuses. "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" I echoed bitterly. "So what, Emma? You just happened to end up at a hotel with another man? How do you think that makes me feel? How do you think I can trust you after this?" She wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. She couldn't hide it anymore. "I don't know what to say," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Jack. I'm so sorry." But her apology felt hollow, like an afterthought, something she was saying because she had been caught, not because she truly regretted it. I stared at her, my heart aching, my mind spinning. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was standing in front of me, and yet she felt like a stranger. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to move forward from this. The silence hung heavy between us, and in that moment, I realized that no matter what she said, things would never be the same again. Emma took a shaky breath and started to speak, her voice low and hesitant. "It wasn't what you think, Jack. It was an old friend of mine. From Mexico. He's staying at the hotel, and I just went to see him. That's all." I stared at her, my mind reeling. The excuses were already starting. "An old friend from Mexico?" I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" She nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yes, I hadn't seen him in years, and he happened to be in town. We just caught up, had a drink. Nothing happened, Jack. I swear." I wanted to believe her. I wanted so badly to believe that this was all a misunderstanding, that the woman I loved wasn't hiding something as awful as I feared. But I couldn't shake the image of her in that car with the man, the stranger. My gut told me this wasn't just some innocent reunion with an old friend. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. "So, this old friend," I said, my voice cold and measured, "he's the man you were with in the car?" Her eyes widened slightly, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face again. But she quickly composed herself, straightening up and trying to hold my gaze. "Yes, that's him," she said, though her voice wavered just a little. We went to the hotel to catch up, and then I gave him a ride afterward. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I unlocked my phone and scrolled to the photo, the one my friend had sent me. The one of Emma in the car with the man sitting next to her. I held it up for her to see, watching her reaction carefully. Her expression shifted, her eyes flickering from the photo to my face and back again. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "Jack, I can explain," she stammered, her voice shaky now. "Go ahead," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Explain." She swallowed hard, her hands wringing together in front of her. "That's him," she said quickly, pointing to the man in the photo. He's a classmate of mine. From college. We ran into each other by chance, and I gave him a ride after we met at the hotel." Her story was changing again, and the more she talked, the less convincing it all sounded. I stared at her, my anger barely contained. "So now he's not an old friend from Mexico, but a classmate from college?" I said, my voice thick with frustration. "Emma, do you really expect me to believe this?" She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears again. "Jack, please," she whispered. "It's the truth. I was just trying to. I didn't want to upset you." I shook my head, pacing across the kitchen as I tried to keep my emotions in check. "You didn't want to upset me?" I repeated bitterly. "Emma, you're lying to me. You've been lying from the start. First, he's an old friend from Mexico, and now he's a classmate? Which one is it? Or are you just making this up as you go along?" She took a step toward me, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean to lie, Jack," she said, her voice desperate now. "I was just afraid you'd misunderstand. It's not what it looks like, I swear. I ran into him by accident. I didn't plan any of this." I stopped pacing and turned to face her, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a lead blanket. "You didn't plan any of this," I said quietly, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "But here we are, Emma. You're caught in a lie, and instead of coming clean, you're just digging yourself in deeper." Her tears were falling freely now, but I didn't feel the same urge to comfort her that I usually did. Instead, I felt numb, like I was watching this all happen from a distance. "I'm telling you the truth now, Jack," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I swear, it was just a chance encounter. We talked, I gave him a ride, and that's all. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was all some horrible misunderstanding, that she wasn't lying to my face. But deep down, I knew better. The pieces didn't add up. The changed password, the hotel receipt, the photo of her with that man, everything pointed to something she wasn't telling me, and it felt like she was trying to scramble for any explanation that might make it all go away. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to think. "Why didn't you tell me about him before?" I asked, my voice calmer now but still heavy with suspicion. "If it's just a friend, why not tell me you were meeting him? Why sneak around?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she murmured. "I thought it would just make things worse if I brought it up." "Worse?" I snapped. "Worse than what? Me finding a hotel receipt and a picture of you with some guy I don't know? Worse than you lying to my face about who he is?" She flinched at my words, but I couldn't stop now. The anger and hurt that had been simmering all night were finally boiling over. "Emma, you're hiding something from me, and it's not just about this guy. If you can't be honest with me now, after everything, how am I supposed to believe anything you say?" Her shoulders shook as she cried softly, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of regret, of guilt for pushing her like this. But that feeling was quickly swallowed by the deeper ache of betrayal. "I just want the truth," I said, my voice softening slightly. "Tell me the truth, Emma. No more lies." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, but she didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, as the weight of her deception hung in the air. I waited, but I knew, even before she spoke again, that the truth wasn't going to come easily. And maybe, just maybe, I'd never really know the full story. The tension between us lingered in the air like a thick fog, and as the silence stretched on, I realized I wasn't going to get the truth from Emma, not now, maybe not ever. I stared at her, standing there, tearful and trembling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something. The pieces didn't add up, no matter how hard she tried to convince me. Her shifting stories only deepened my suspicions. I took a slow breath, my mind working through the next steps. Confronting her like this wasn't getting me anywhere. She was too deep in her own lies to come clean on her own. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to find it myself. I knew I needed more than just a receipt or a single photo. If there really was something going on, if she was seeing this guy behind my back, I needed proof, undeniable proof that she couldn't wriggle out of with more half-baked excuses. And that's when the idea hit me: surveillance. Emma had been using my car to meet him. The photo made that clear. If she was going to keep sneaking around, the car was where I'd find the evidence. I wasn't going to ask her any more questions. I was done with waiting for her to come clean. This time, I'd catch her in the act, and when I had the proof in my hands, she wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. That evening, when Emma went to bed early again, claiming her headache had returned, I made my move. After checking to make sure she was asleep, I quietly slipped out of the bedroom and headed to the garage. My heart was pounding in my chest, not from fear but from the raw mix of emotions swirling inside me: anger, suspicion, and a cold determination to get to the bottom of this once and for all. I had spent the afternoon doing research, carefully selecting the tools I'd need. I had ordered a small, invisible camera designed specifically for situations like this, discreet enough that she would never notice it but with high enough resolution to capture everything. Along with the camera, I bought a GPS tracker, something small enough to attach to the underside of the car without it being detected. It would track her movements in real time, and I'd know exactly where she went and when. There wouldn't be any more lies about old friends or classmates anymore. Once I was in the garage, I grabbed the equipment from the drawer where I had stashed it earlier. My hands shook slightly as I unpacked the camera, feeling a strange mix of guilt and resolve. This wasn't something I ever thought I'd do: spy on my own wife. But then again, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. I crouched down next to the driver's seat and carefully positioned the camera. It was small, no bigger than a button, and fit perfectly in the small crevice between the dashboard and the front windshield, almost invisible from the outside. Anyone sitting in the car wouldn't notice it unless they were looking for it, and even then, it would be hard to spot. I adjusted its angle to ensure it would capture everything happening in the front seats. Next, I moved on to the tracker. I slid under the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I found a secure spot underneath the frame. The tracker would be able to send me real-time updates on her location, and I'd have access to her every movement. There would be no more excuses, no more stories about where she was or who she was with. I would know the truth, whether she was ready to admit it or not. Once everything was in place, I climbed out from under the car and wiped my hands on my pants, taking a moment to collect myself. It felt surreal, like I had crossed a line I could never uncross. But it was necessary. I couldn't go on living in this uncertainty, in this nightmare where every word she said felt like another potential lie. As I stood in the quiet of the garage, the reality of what I had just done began to sink in. I was spying on my wife. I had installed a camera and a tracker in her car, and there was no going back from that. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't afford to be soft anymore. I couldn't afford to let my emotions cloud my judgment. I went back inside the house, my mind racing. The camera was set, the tracker was live, and all I had to do now was wait. The next time Emma used the car, I would know exactly where she was going, and I would see everything. When I lay down in bed next to her that night, she stirred slightly but didn't wake. I watched her for a moment, her breathing soft and steady, and a part of me wished, foolishly, that this could all just be some terrible misunderstanding. That tomorrow, she'd tell me something that made sense, something that would clear all of this up, and we could go back to the way things were. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. The truth was out there now, waiting for me to uncover it, and soon enough, I would. As I drifted into a restless sleep, the small camera in the car and the tracker ticking away in real time felt like a countdown to the moment when everything would come crashing down. The next evening, Emma was getting ready to head out again. I watched her as she moved around the house, casually slipping into a dress that I had never seen her wear before. It was tighter than what she usually wore, showing off more than she typically did, and I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. Something was wrong, and I could sense it in the way she avoided making eye contact with me. "I'm going to a party at a friend's house," she said nonchalantly, grabbing her purse and keys as if everything was completely normal. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, forcing a tight smile as she kissed me on the cheek and headed for the door. But the moment it closed behind her, my heart started racing. Tonight was different. Tonight, I had the tools to follow her, to know exactly where she was going and, more importantly, who she was with. The app on my phone was already open. I watched the little icon of my car move slowly on the map as Emma drove off, her location updating in real time. My pulse quickened. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. After about 10 minutes, the car stopped in front of an address I didn't recognize. The app showed her parked on a quiet street near her friend's house. I waited, my eyes glued to the screen. Then, I saw two more figures approach the car, her friend and her friend's boyfriend, both getting into the back seat. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of relief. Maybe this really was just a normal night out with friends. Maybe I was wrong after all. But then, they drove off again, and something changed. The app showed the car stopping in another unfamiliar spot a few blocks away, and that's when I saw him, the same man from the photo. The stranger. He climbed into the front passenger seat next to Emma, just like before. My heart sank. I watched as the car made its way across town, moving away from the party scene and towards something else, something darker. They parked near a club, and I waited, feeling the tension build inside me. I could feel my hands shaking slightly as I imagined what they might be doing in there. I had a front row seat to my worst nightmare, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming. After about an hour, the app showed them getting back into the car. My throat tightened as I saw them drive not back into the city, but out of town, toward the outskirts. They were heading into the woods. Panic surged through me. Why would they be going out there? What were they planning? My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. I could feel my chest tighten as I watched the car wind its way down increasingly remote roads, the dark patches of trees on the map growing denser with each passing mile. And then the car stopped. I sat there, staring at the screen, frozen with dread. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The icon stayed still, as if everything had come to a standstill. But then the camera in the car kicked in, streaming the video straight to my phone, and what I saw next made my blood run cold. At first, it seemed innocent enough. They were all talking, laughing, like any group of friends might do. But then something shifted. The atmosphere in the car became charged with something else, something electric and wrong. Emma's friend leaned over to her boyfriend, and they started kissing in the back seat, their movements slow and deliberate. I could barely breathe. Then, as if on cue, Emma turned toward the man next to her, the same man from the photo, the stranger who had haunted my thoughts for days, and they kissed. Not just a peck or a quick moment of affection. No, this was something far more intense. My hands clenched into fists as I watched them. They were all paired off now, kissing, their hands roaming over each other. My head was spinning, my vision blurring with rage and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not Emma. Not my wife. But it got worse. Much worse. The video showed Emma slowly climbing over the center console, moving toward the man in the passenger seat. She sat on his lap, her legs straddling him, and I saw them begin to move together, their bodies grinding against each other in a rhythm that made my stomach churn. The sound of moaning filled the small car, and I could see the others in the back seat, still caught up in their own twisted moments of pleasure. My mind went blank. The shock of what I was seeing paralyzed me, rooting me to the spot. It felt like I was watching a scene from some horrible movie, a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Emma was moving rhythmically on this stranger's lap, her head tilted back, and her soft moans pierced through the silence of my living room. I sat there, staring at the screen, completely numb. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It felt like my entire world was collapsing around me, and I couldn't stop it. The video continued, showing more than I could bear to see. The moaning grew louder, the movements more frantic, and then it hit me, this wasn't just some casual thing. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. This was something far worse than I had ever imagined. That's when I snapped. I couldn't stay there, sitting helplessly as my wife betrayed me in the worst possible way. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the house. I didn't even bother with my own car. I ran to my neighbor's place, breathless and shaking as I knocked on their door. Luckily, my neighbor was home, and I quickly made up an excuse about needing to borrow their car for an emergency. Once I had the keys in my hand, I jumped into the car and sped off, the sound of the engine barely registering over the deafening roar of blood pounding in my ears. I drove like a madman, following the location on my phone, my thoughts racing, my heart breaking with every passing second. I didn't know what I would do when I got there, but one thing was clear, I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't let Emma, the woman I had loved and trusted, destroy everything we had built together. Not like this. And as I raced through the night, the only thought in my mind was that I was about to face a reality I never thought possible. My heart was pounding in my chest as I sped down the dark, narrow roads. The trees blurred by in the night, and I barely registered anything except the growing anger, the betrayal pulsing through me like a living thing. The GPS on my phone showed their location, just a short distance ahead. The image of Emma and that stranger together, the way she had moved on him, the sounds that had filled the car, it all burned in my mind, driving me faster, harder, toward what I knew would be the most painful confrontation of my life. As I got closer, I slowed down, the adrenaline making my hands shake on the steering wheel. I couldn't let them see me coming. I had to stay in control, though control was slipping away with each second. I spotted their car, parked at the edge of a clearing just off the road. The headlights were off, and the only light came from the faint glow of the dashboard inside. They were still there, hidden away in the woods, thinking they were safe. But I was there now. And they had no idea. I parked the neighbor's car a little further down the road, far enough away that they wouldn't see or hear me coming. I turned off the headlights and killed the engine, sitting there for a moment, letting the silence close in around me. My heart was thundering in my chest, the tension building to a breaking point. I had to do this. I stepped out of the car as quietly as I could, leaving the door slightly ajar. The night air was cool, but I barely noticed. My entire body was focused on one thing, getting to that car and ending this nightmare. I started moving, each step faster than the last, until I was running, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. When I reached their car, the windows were fogged up, but I could see enough to know what was happening inside. Emma was still in the front seat, straddling the stranger, their bodies intertwined. The sight sent a fresh wave of rage surging through me, and before I even knew what I was doing, my hand was on the door handle, yanking it open with all the force I could muster. The door swung wide, and the startled gasps from inside the car hit me like a punch. Emma and the man jerked apart, their faces flushed with shock and confusion. For a split second, no one moved. And then, everything happened in a blur. Without a word, I reached in and grabbed the stranger by the collar, hauling him out of the car with a strength I didn't even know I had. He barely had time to react before he was on the ground, his back hitting the dirt with a dull thud. He tried to scramble to his feet, but I was already reaching for Emma. She was still sitting in the front seat, frozen in shock, her mouth open as if she was about to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed her by the arm and pulled her out of the car as well, my grip firm but not rough. She stumbled out, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, but I couldn't focus on her face. I couldn't focus on anything except the anger boiling inside me. "Get out," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. I barely recognized the sound of my own voice. It was raw, filled with a fury that had been building inside me for days. The stranger, now on his feet, started to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but I wasn't listening. I took a step toward him, and he backed away, his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. But it was too late for that. The damage was done. "You stay the hell away from her," I snarled, my fists clenched so tightly that my knuckles were white. He nodded frantically, his face pale in the dim light, but I didn't care what he had to say. I turned back to Emma, who was still standing by the car, trembling. Her eyes were filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had loved for so many years, the woman I had built a life with. But then the memory of what I had seen on that screen came rushing back, and all I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. "Jack, please." She started, her voice shaky, but I cut her off, my hand raised to silence her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Not another word. I've heard enough." She sobbed, her hands reaching out toward me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "How could you, Emma? How could you do this?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders slumped in defeat. And for the first time, I realized that whatever explanation she might give, it didn't matter. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. I turned away from her, leaving her standing there next to the stranger, and walked back to the car I had borrowed. My mind was spinning, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened, but I knew one thing for certain. This was the end.